Z4K here. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the semi-pro level of videography. This is for you guys that are starting up a business or starting up a new venture of some sort and are ready to move over from a cell phone to a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. I'm going to be teaching you guys the settings that you guys need to know about, the accessories that you guys should have, as well as the software that would be effective. So be prepared, get ready. If you have a notepad next to you, get that out. It's going to be jam-packed. So first off, I'm shooting with a Sony a7 III. I highly recommend this. I was actually using a Nikon D800 back in the day. Still pretty good camera. I believe now it's like the D850. I'm also shooting on a 24x70mm Zeiss lens, and that works really well for me. So without further ado, let's talk about the settings. So a couple of things you need to know about your camera. Now, these are the basics that are for all types of DSLRs and mirrorless cameras that help with lighting. So now let's talk about shutter versus aperture versus ISO levels. These three things are super important for your lighting and for a happy balance. So let's get into all of these right now, and we're going to start off with shutter speed. So what is shutter speed? Shutter speed is how long light hits your sensor. Probably see numbers on your camera, something like 1/50th or 1/200th. These are your shutter settings. So this will actually help with how long light hits your sensor. Depending on your frame rate, you'll double your shutter speed. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, you double that and you get 48. So some cameras may not have a 48, and so they may have a 50. So you would want to set it at a 50. So next, what we're going to talk about is aperture. Aperture is the f-stop on your lens. Now you'll notice that your lens is either like an f4 or an f1.5, depending on the type of lens you have. The higher your f-stop is, the darker your video will be, or the darker the image will be. The lower the f-stop, the brighter. So the f-stop is pretty much the opening on your lens that allows light to come into your sensor. Lastly, we're going to talk about ISO. ISO is how sensitive the sensor is going to be to light. The lower the ISO, the darker your image will be. The higher the ISO, the brighter it's going to be. I would highly recommend shooting at a lower ISO rather than a higher ISO, because the higher the ISO setting is, the more noise or the more grainier you'll notice your video. If you need to have more light in, and if you've already set your ISO at, let's say, about 1,000 or 2,000 and you still find it quite dark, that's when I would highly recommend you introduce a camera light into the frame or into the object that you're shooting or the event that you're shooting at. That will help bring in a lot more light into your sensors, and your footage will look a lot better. So when setting up your camera before starting a shoot, I would highly recommend you first start off with setting up your shutter. Okay, so set up your shutter speed. After your shutter speed, then you can set up your aperture. Once your aperture is all set, then you can adjust your ISO levels accordingly with small increments and adjustments, and you're set to go. So that's pretty much the camera settings that I wanted to talk about really briefly. Once you get these mastered and you get a happy medium, you're going to be shooting some amazing and fantastic footage, I promise you. Next thing I want to talk to you about is software. So software, I would highly recommend Final Cut Pro or Adobe Premiere. These two are wonderful. I personally use Final Cut Pro on a Mac. If you're using Adobe Premiere, you have that flexibility of using it on a PC or a Mac. As far as I know, Final Cut Pro is not available on a PC as of yet. If you're watching this video 2 years later, things might change. So the difference between Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere are pretty similar. However, Adobe Premiere is slightly more manual, so you get a little bit more flexibility with certain settings in Adobe Premiere, whereas Final Cut Pro is made more simplified and is a lot easier to use, in my opinion. So the last part of the video is the accessories. I just wanted to quickly touch on a list that I would highly recommend for semi-pro videographers, in no particular order. And the first part I would actually highly suggest is a tripod stand. You need a tripod stand to keep your camera stable, and for that I am using a Manfrotto tripod. The next item I'd highly recommend is a gimbal. This gimbal is by Evo Rage. This is Evo Rage number 2, and this is a really good device or accessory to have if you're on the go and you're walking around. This will keep your footage butter smooth, and I would highly recommend it. Another thing I would highly recommend is this camera bag. So not this exact camera bag, but any camera bag I would highly recommend, rather than using any type of backpack or pouch or whatever that some people may be using. A backpack like this is fantastic because of its compartments that are in here. I'll just quickly show you if you guys haven't seen what something like this looks like. And it looks like this. So you have a bunch of compartments that are all adjustable to put your lenses, your microphones, your body itself. Really good, secure. You can carry it on your back. Next thing I would highly recommend is get a lens. Now, the camera will come with a kit lens. Most cameras do come with a kit lens, but what I'm using here that I'm shooting with here today is a 24x70 Zeiss lens, and I'm really happy with that. I also got this G Master lens over here. It's a 12x24, quite expensive, but this is fantastic for wide shots like real estate, group shots, weddings, stuff like that, architecture, landscapes. This is a beauty. Sound is really important, so I would highly recommend a microphone. Now in here I got a Rode wireless mic, and I'll show you that real quick. There's like two pieces, one that actually sits on top of your camera, one that can clip onto your shirt. This is fantastic, but it is a little more expensive. If you're on a budget, I got a Rode micro mic here on the side. That's really good. I got it on a boom that I picked up from Amazon. It works fantastic. You can actually have this mounted onto your camera as well if you're on the go. Please do invest in a microphone. It does a day and night difference. Next thing I'd recommend is a light. This light is by Aperture. I'm going to turn that on. It's really nice, really bright. It has some temperature controls, so you can actually go from something really warm to something really cold, and this is really good. This can actually mount onto your camera as well. Lastly is an ND filter. Now this one is a variable ND filter, so you use this outside when you're shooting people. Let's say you're shooting people and you've set your aperture, you've set your ISO, and you still have a blown out look behind. You can't see the sky, you can't see, let's say, the water or the trees behind them. Let's say you're underneath a shaded area, you would snap one of these onto your lens. Now this actually is a variable ND, which means you can actually brighten and darken. There we go. And this will allow you to see those clouds, see the water, see the trees, everything that's behind the objects that you're shooting. And this is the last piece that I would highly recommend. And that's pretty much that. So I hope this was enjoyable. I know there was a lot of information from camera settings to software to accessories, but I wanted to give you all the information that you needed to start off as a semi-pro videographer. So we'll see you on the next one. Take care.